The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined once again by Tuomas Malinen from Helsinki, who is the CEO and chief economist of GNSeconomics.com, which produces excellent reports and economic forecasts. He's also an adjunct professor of economics at the University of Helsinki. We'll be discussing the global economy and the historic crash that is now underway. Before I get to our guest, let me just remind listeners to subscribe to our email list and alternative channels such as Telegram, BitChute, MeWe, and Minds. Dr. Robert Epstein was on this channel half a year ago, warning that 2020 was the year of the big tech takeover, and his prophecy has come true in spades. Massive censorship is going on. So stay in touch with us through our website, email list, alternative channels, and please leave us a podcast review and tip if possible. All right, Tuomas, how are you doing these days? And is GNS Economics keeping you busy?
Hi, hi, thank you. Well, I'm fine. Actually, I'm rather busy now. I try to have a small break maybe next week, but GNS Economics, we are growing rather rapidly now, and they are all, different projects are on the way. So we are in a good spot now, and it's truly interesting as we follow the kind of a development of the global crisis that really got started in March this year.
It's good to hear that you're doing well and that GNS Economics is growing. I thought we might start by carrying over from our first conversation from a year ago, which took place last November of 2019. And I just did an interview as well with economist Alasdair MacLeod, who pretty much made, same predictions as yourself. He wrote an article as well in November of 2019, outlining many aspects of the current crisis. So both of you made these kind of calls before the so-called pandemic. So 1 year ago, you said that this financial crash and calamity was going to be absolutely historic and that it was inevitable, baked in the cake, ready to go. And it seems we are now well underway into this crash. It was reported that US unemployment is 26%. That's Great Depression territory. Some banks are teetering on collapse, while the central banks are looking to move us to, I suppose, perpetual money printing through digital currencies and perhaps a cashless total control system. The IMF has come out and said we are now officially on par with the 1930s Great Depression. So I could never imagine we'd be living in such a scenario. Can you tell us, how far along are we in this crisis? How bad things are going?
Well, they are quite bad, actually. The warning or the discussion we had November last year. We were just waiting to see when the recession comes and the banking sector problems start in Europe. We consider that the ground zero of the coming crisis will be in Europe. Well, the recession started in Q4. Actually, recession started in Europe when we spoke, basically, and that we first considered that would be big enough trigger, although it would take some time for the crisis to truly get going in the Eurozone. But now when the corona pandemic hit, two things kind of happened. First, the crash on the financial markets came, but then also what also came was a never before seen response by the global authorities. So we took a massive leap towards this Financial Socialism that we have been warning when the crash happens, it will start the process, and now we're in the process, going into deeper into Financial Socialism. All these things you mentioned, like the IMF calling the new Bretton Woods and the digital currencies, and all this is just one part of it. In essence, this is a question of the global institutions and leaders being afraid that they will lose their power. And this is behind this massive response that we have seen, like governments taking trillions of dollars of debt and central banks printing the similar amounts. And they have all been thrown into the economy in a desperate effort to kind of get this global zombie economy going again. And it will not work. It will help for a while, but we are heading into some really deep water here.
Yeah, I wanted to save that topic for a little bit later, the global economic dystopia, because that's for me, I mean, that's one of the most important things, and that's kind of like the end game. And so, but before we get there, another one of the topics, you write great articles, so people should go to gnseconomics.com and follow your Twitter. But recently, food is being hoarded, food prices are skyrocketing, farms are being shut down, and supply chains being broken. And then you wrote in one of your recent pieces, quote, "We may even see widespread hunger and rationing in the Western world for the first time since the 1900s," end quote. I've been feeling the same way. And, this is absolutely astonishing. It's like we're living in a movie. What do you make of these developments, these consequences, for example, in the food sector, as well as in other areas that we might be hit?
Well, back in early May, we published a special report which was titled "Apocalypse Now?" ? So in it, we envisage how would second wave of the coronavirus pandemic combined with the banking crisis hit the world economy. It was actually based on the on this scenarios or modeling of the Center of Infectious Disease Policy and Research in University of Minnesota, or CITRAP, and they're modeling on how the coronavirus pandemic could develop over the coming fall and winter and spring. They effectively what they did, they modeled or they followed the process that the Spanish flu took, which kind of ravaged the world in the 1980s and 1990s. And from it, we concluded that if a bad second wave hits and there is also a banking crisis, there is a very high possibility that the global supply chain will break down completely, meaning also that the food transports will cease. And there are several mechanisms for this to happen. First, in the banking crisis, if and when it's global, there are things called global freight derivatives, which are essentially insurances for all the bigger shipments of food or any freight actually across the globe. And if the banking system crashes, you will not get those insurances, which means that the freight will stop. And this was the first kind of process that could lead to these serious food disruptions. And second one was natural that the coronavirus will break the chains, which already in some small areas did happen during the spring wave. But then there's also a third development which has not been recognized fully, is that this is now coming to be, I think, this is the fourth consecutive year of famine. Not famine, no, not famine. The word was there has been a problem with fruit production across the globe. So our food supplies are dropping at the same time when we have these problems emerging in the horizon on the possibility of food chains breaking up. And this is we don't consider this to be a high probability event yet, but this is a true risk. And if that would come to be, we could really see famines for a first time and for a long time in the Western world. And this is not something we are forecasting, but we are warning on the possibility of such an event.
Yeah, I definitely hope it doesn't get to that stage. But, every time Tuomas makes a forecast, this might happen. Often it goes in that bad direction. But speaking of as well, the food prices and inflation, I live between Kazakhstan and Mexico, and I'm looking at the data and I'm seeing, I'm feeling it in my purchases that food prices are going anywhere from 10% to basic goods to, I remember lemons in Kazakhstan spiking to 50% their prices. Okay, I mean, they don't grow lemons in Kazakhstan, they import them, but things are getting crazy. And what about, looking at debt levels in all the nations, especially the US? It seems it's just they've reached debts that will never, ever be paid. These are historic levels of debts. And I think the US has admitted, well, most countries, they cannot and will not stop printing Money, my previous podcast guest, said we have already entered into the stage of hyperinflation. That's perhaps debatable. Yesterday, the Federal Reserve regulation chief said surging deficits are going to require ongoing Fed interventions. You've said that the perfect setup has been created for accelerating inflation and hyperinflation. Are we going back to the future, to Weimar Germany?
That's something we have started to fear, because effectively for a hyperinflation to happen, you need two conditions to be met. First is that you need to have a central bank monetizing the debt or the deficits of governments, and governments using that money to effectively increase their spending. And the second one is this usually has to be included, but you can get the hyperinflation just by printing. But the second condition is that the production possibilities need to be in decline in some way. This is what happened in the Weimar Republic, for example. And we are currently seeing quite a wave of corporate bankruptcies all over the world, and they are expected to increase when the debt moratoriums, which have now started to end, and they will continue to end all through next spring, basically. So when the debts come due, then you just companies will fail. And now we are in a strange kind of a unbalanced situation where you have the declining economic output, with the governments trying to desperately increase their or to keep the economies afloat. And this is the setup where you can get to a point where the money printing goes so wildly off the charts that companies and especially workers will start to demand higher and higher wages. And this is effectively what drives hyperinflation. It's just not the money printing, but people, companies and workers seeing their purchasing power of their salaries and income decline. And there it goes. And so we are in a situation where it's not the central banks have printed so much money into the economy. It has just gone into the financial markets. But at the same time, the velocity of money, basically meaning how often it's used, has declined. And we have started to think that what will happen if, let's say, there is what would happen if there would be let's say, a spike in the prices of food? Would there be an increase in the velocity of money? Would the sum of the money that has gone into financial markets come in the real economy? Could it fire up the inflation expectations? What could happen? We are really in a uncharted territory here, and the real worry is that the central banks will keep printing, government will keep spending no matter what, and they will not accept that we are in a deep economic hole and we have to fix it. We just can't print it over. And that's when hyperinflations happen. When you have an economic crash, which you try to cover by printing money. And we are very close of that point. So that's why we have started to worry about the possibility of hyperinflation even globally. This is just because it seems that the central authorities are so desperate to hold on the power, they will sacrifice everything to save the economy from itself, if you may, by creating a setup for a monetary destruction. And this is something that everyone needs to worry now. I am not afraid of economic or financial crisis. I've done 10 years of academic research on them, and we always recover from those. But hyperinflations, they are nasty creatures. They destroy the fabric of the society by destroying the faith of the public in the institutions. So they are really a menace. I truly hope we don't see those. But it's possible.
Well, let's get into that since you mentioned that, and this is one of the biggest issues for me. And for many, many years, I felt that one way or another that we were on this trajectory. I've studied history. I've been a teacher, professor of history, and I could see this coming. And the biggest issue for me, the one that keeps me up at night, as I said, is the threat of global totalitarianism. So, in the past, we've seen totalitarianism take over individual nations, an attempt to take over the European continent. But I think what we're now on the cusp of is the potential for a global totalitarianism. And you've alluded to this in one of your articles for gnseconomics.com. You write, quote, "People and economists should not live in the fear of an economic collapse from which we can recover. They should, however, be mortally afraid of socialism and nationalizations because they will impose a loss of freedom, loss of sovereignty, and at the end, a real risk of totalitarianism. We would effectively step into some form of fascism. This would naturally be to an utter, unrecognizable global economic dystopia," end quote. You call it global financial socialism. For example, I've heard rumors of the IMF offering a debt jubilee program, but that in exchange for wiping debts, the IMF would take over, I guess, all property, which would align with totalitarian scenario. What would this look like in your mind? And would it be like a truly global dystopia over all nations?
Yeah, this is something we have not really thought through yet. We just acknowledge the possibility because let's be honest, like 3 years ago, this would have been a pure like conspiracy theory. But now, after the hit of the coronavirus pandemic and the response of the global authorities, this has become a real possibility. So, one scenario we can dwell on is the fact that when the banking crisis hits, or in a preparation for that, the central banks will set up accounts for every citizen and every corporation within them with the digital currencies. And when the banking crisis comes, banks fall, you just transfer your money and services there. And then all of a sudden, you would have a single bank. It would not be a central bank, it would be the bank of all. And last time the world did see this happening was in early 20th century when the Ghost Bank, or the central bank of Soviet Union, was created. And if you just think about how would this work, and it's also when the crash comes, the central banks need to decide whether they print about 200 trillion US dollars to buy at least half of the estimated total of 400 trillion of risky assets globally. So this would be a nationalization of the financial markets first, and then also the banking markets, or the banking sector. And then we would have one entity in each country deciding which corporations, which households, with whatever, who gets a loan, on what interest, and so forth. And this would fall into the realm of totalitarianism for sure. So it would be a kind of a fascism in a sense, because it would be a full merger of the economy and the government. And the thing is that in this setup, unelected, untouchable central bankers would determine which happens, with which, on the what development, or what in the what direction does the economy go, who gets the funds and stuff like that. And this is what we should be mortally afraid of, because this would be a highly suppressive regime. And they always, when you get an economic power concentrated on one entity or entities, then what follows is a surveillance society, of course, to get everything, acting accordingly. And suddenly we would be in this economic dystopia, or a, global totalitarian dystopia. So it's this is not some far-fetched, theory anymore. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is truly what the path that the IMF and the central banks are setting up with the digital currencies and the idea of the new Bretton Woods and whatever. This is the path they are setting us into, and it would mean the end of the freedom as we now know it. And this is something we have to acknowledge. And you can only stop the central banks by saying, or basically politicians can stop them from saying that enough, audit the central banks and do whatever. And we are really reaching a point of dualism here. So either we go back to the free market economy, or we go into full economic and financial socialism and fascism, basically. So we are not there yet, but we are getting closer to the point when we have to make a decision, and it worries me.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this is not a theory. I've had past guests, expert guests, renowned people discuss these types of things. And, folks as yourself, and especially I like Richard Werner, who explains this in detail, highly credible, intelligent people just laying out the facts. And yes, I mean, they're now bringing us these digital bank currencies and getting rid of cash. I see it everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. Here in Mexico, they've proposed getting rid of the two biggest denominations of bills. And the governors are working like mad to install these digital payment systems to get everyone off cash. And so maybe if you could just have any final comment on this issue. I mean, what happens if they do go this way? The central banks of the world, the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, I don't know, the World Bank, the supranational organizations, they take control. And then another thing Werner mentioned was their goal is to eliminate pretty much all other retail commercial banks. They won't be necessary anymore, just as you said, just our smartphone app with the central bank. And there's no cash. And and he said that our accounts can be suspended if we are dissidents in any way. They can and you can't buy anything. It's like the scenario from the Bible's book of Revelations. You can't buy or sell if you're a critic of the regime. So any final thoughts on this system?
Yeah, the first one is to understand that if we get rid of cash, it will create an extremely hazardous situation for the coming banking crisis, because in a banking crisis, all the banking activities are basically eliminated, all there are serious hindrances in all banking services. And if we would have abolished cash by then we would be truly on the mercy of the central banks or whatever. Because in that case, you could only have the digital currencies run through the central banks. But this is a highly risky scenario also in a way that all the payment systems has to be incorporated into the central bank. And I don't know how can they do it in the current setup with at least they cannot do it. Well, let me rephrase. So how can they do it in a timely manner in the current setup? That I don't know, because every payment system basically works through the banks now. Central banks are only intermediaries there. So I don't know if the banking crisis hits, let's say in the spring when we forecast or anticipate it to come, will there be enough time for central banks to work through all this? I hope not. And but if we would end up there and see the cash abolished, we would everything that Professor Werner said is completely true. We could the real risk is that we would have this totalitarian state controlling all our efforts. They could slap any kind of regulations or punishment for any kind of actions, and the banks would need to be abolished, of course, because there would be just one bank, and we would truly enter into the Soviet era of global ghost banks. And I'm so old that I remember vaguely the Soviet Union, and I visited it as a boy. And it was a strange construct. I know a lot of people who lived there and worked there. And I don't see anyone, I don't know anyone who would want for it to come back. So this is a risk. Like if we would have talked like 2 years ago, I would have not said this. But now this is a risk. We have to acknowledge the possibility that from the crisis emerges a totalitarian global state. And that would be the dystopia to end all dystopias. So we have to fight against that, whatever it means. Basically, we need to get on the road to freedom, not on the road to totalitarianism.
Yes, there's something that each and every one of us has to do, fight against this. The IMF has now come out, I think yesterday or the day before, calling for a new Bretton Woods moment. Is that what we've just been discussing, or what do you think they are thinking about this after Bretton Woods? This new global financial system. I suppose they're talking about getting rid of the dollar world reserve. What are they? Are we going to move to a multi reserve, to IMF special drawing rights? Will gold be included? What are your thoughts there?
I don't know. I think the end game is to go to the digital currencies. Central banks, China, Russia, they have been hoarding gold, physical gold, in a preparation probably for the collapse of the monetary system, in which case the gold would be used to set it up again. But I'm not sure what. I don't think there have been any clear guidelines from the IMF what they would like to see. But I think the idea is to go on the central bank digital currencies, and so they could suppress the rates to strongly negative and try to fix the economy in that way, which is just ridiculous, the idea, because we already know the negative rates don't work, and it's just, I don't know. It's really difficult to say, but the signs or omens even are there that they are planning to, when the crisis truly hits, they will offer us a solution out of it by giving out our monetary freedoms. That's how it looks, in all honesty, without any conspirational thinking. This is if you look this objectively, this is what you see happening now, and it's been going really fast from March on. So I was highly critical of such theories even a few years ago. I read about this, but the end game of the global elite. But now I have to admit that those who we call the conspiracy theorists in the past may have had a point here. That's in all honesty, because this does not look like a normal preparation. This looks like a takeover. Actually, to me, this looks like a preparation for a financial takeover in a case of a crisis. It's I don't like saying this, but this is how it looks.
Yeah, we've entered the twilight zone, the Bermuda Triangle. I've had the pleasure of interviewing G. Edward Griffin, the famed author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. I've even had lunch with him. He laid this scenario out in his book some 25 years ago. So forget conspiracy theory. I've even interviewed the academic who wrote the book on conspiracy theory, who said that was a term popularized by the intelligence services to discredit anyone criticizing the government. So we're well past.
Let me tell you this. My mother is a retired history teacher, and a few years back when we were talking about conspiracy theories, she said that there have always been conspiracy theories. Now we just need to know in which one of these do we currently live.
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then looking at perhaps something else you've been talking about is China. We've been hearing that Western economies, I think, are in negative growth. Meanwhile, China has ended supposedly their lockdowns and they're growing at, I think I saw 5% or something. You've said the Chinese economy is not growing, and they have just used credit expansion to attempt to grow their economy with the money most likely going to unproductive investments. Is China doing any better, or are they in the same situation?
No, they are. It's just we follow the social, or what's it called nowadays, the financing of the real economy or something like that. They measure published by the Central Bank of China on the all money going into the economy, bank loans, bonds, mutual funded trust, whatever. And since March, I'd call it that it has gone stratospheric, because it has gone in a whole different direction from the previous year. It goes not straight up, but with a very big steep angle. It's heading upwards. So it just implies, or it doesn't even imply, it says that China is pushing massive amounts of credit into the economy, debt into the already highly indebted economy, to appear, so that the economy would appear to be growing. But in real life, the actual level of financing is growing something like 15%. 15%. So it's more than 3 times faster than the GDP. So it makes absolutely no sense of talking about China recovery. We would print similar amounts of money. Sure we would see, or we issued such a wild amount of credit in the economy, or post the credit in the economy, we would surely see some growth, economic growth in at least this, when comparing purely this measure of GDP. But this is not real growth. And China is so ridiculously indebted already. So when we are using the own calculations of the People's Bank of China, we have estimated that the credit or the loan levels or debt levels in Chinese economy are something like 500 to 600% of GDP. And I don't know, has there ever been such a massive debt bubble in history? I don't like the shadow banking sector is 3 to 4 times the size of the economy, according to the estimates of the Central Bank of China. And it just doesn't make any sense. They're just pushing massive amounts of debt into the economy to appear that the economy is growing. So I don't know. It's not recovery. I don't know what it should be called, but it's not recovery.
And since you're based in the EU and in Europe, to get your thoughts on what's happening in Europe, in the Eurozone with the EU, I'm personally not a fan of the European Union. I'm an EU citizen, so I feel it's a anti-democratic system, a technocratic system. You and others have said that the euro is at risk of dying and the whole construct disintegrating. What are your thoughts there? Like, I feel that would be likely, but I feel like the powers that be would do everything in their power to not allow that to happen.
That's for sure, yeah. But if you look at the economic situation in Europe or in the Eurozone, we are in the gutters, basically. So we are heading back down again. If you look at PMIs, all the real-time indicators, and the recession started already a year ago in Q4. And the recapitalization needs of the Southern European banks are just massive. They are some estimated to be close to 1 trillion euros already in Italy, Spain, and Portugal and Greece. And this is massive problems. And what the French and German leaders are mortally afraid of is that Italy or Spain or both exit the Eurozone and default. And that would mean that they would have to recapitalize their banks, who have lent quite heavily on Italy and Spain, and in a range of hundreds of billions of euros. And then they decided, when they got really scared during the pandemic or the first wave, that we should have what is now called the recovery fund, where we would distribute funds from the north to the south. And this is the EU leaders got it agreed, but the resistance against it is growing in Finland, in Austria, in the Netherlands, and even in Sweden, that I hear. So people are not willing to just give out money to the southern members of the European Union. And they're like, if it's a kind of it's a mixed bag, if you may. So if we tumble the fund, it doesn't succeed, we will have a banking crisis and the Eurozone will break up. But if the fund goes through, we still have a banking crisis. The fund will have to be increased at least 5-fold, which will be taken not politely or in a good way in Finland and in many of the paying nations. And if that happens, we have enacted forces that could break up the European Union at the end. So there's already this thing. I think it was yesterday, when there was news that Spain, Italy, and Portugal will not apply for the loans from the fund, only the grants. And okay, this gives a hint what they are aiming for. They want money from us, and they want more of it. And the thing is that there is an idea that the funds will be paid back through increased payments to the EU, membership payments, and you can easily think of a scenario where the fund becomes permanent, and then some member nation who is the net payer nation says no, we don't pay. And when Italy and Spain see this, say, well, okay, why do we stick in the European Union? We only have to pay. We have received the funds already. Why we need to stay in and pay? And in that place, the European Union breaks up. And this is what I fear. And this is the people, like our politicians, seem to be unable to construct even a two-step forecast. They just think, no, we have to get this fund so that the euro will stay intact. But they don't seem to think that, or seem to be able to think, what will be the next step, or even the third step. So what we see, or I see, is that the banking crisis in Europe is inevitable. It will come. Only thing we can decide is whether we save the euro or the European Union. I would definitely save the European Union and let the euro go to waste, or to the gutters, because it has been a disastrous project. And this is something that people should really understand in Europe and elsewhere too. The whole construct of the European Union is unsavable, in a sense that it will not be free, open, democratic European Union if we go through these steps. You would need some really strict enforcing measures to keep all the countries in the case we have the recovery fund, for example. So this is something. This is not the European Union. The European nations were agreed to join back in the days, and this has changed. So at least we should have changes in the treaties, and many of those would not go through. But the easiest way, I think, would be to just let the euro go. Just let the euro go. It's not worth it. So save the euro. No, save the European Union. Let the euro go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sensible. And as you say, if the politicians cannot, plan more than one step or two steps ahead, at least we can individually. And so your reports, which people can purchase, go into much greater detail on ways, besides the forecasts, which have been accurate, they also go into detail on ways people can protect themselves. My feeling, some of my basic ideas are simply getting out of debt and getting into real and hard and productive assets. What are some defense mechanisms for the everyday person?
Well, there are just few. You have to keep cash. That's for sure, at least before the possible hyperinflation hits. But you need to have cash because of the banking crisis. In a banking crisis, a credit card and all such services will be disconnected or will become unavailable within a matter of days. This is something that people do not understand. This is what happens in a financial crisis. So you just need to keep cash. And if you are living in a country which has very low self-sufficiency on food, buy some, stock of food. That's just for safekeeping. There's a high probability that you do not need it. But if you need it, the scarcity of food is the worst, because we cannot survive without it. So have a small stock, 2 weeks to a month stock of cash, and few weeks worth of 2 weeks worth of food. Basically, you have those. I think you are covered. But this is the best we can do, because it's really difficult to forecast the severity of the crisis when it hits. It's going to be bad, that we know, but how bad? It could be, life-changing or institution-altering, or a bit smaller. We just don't know that, but we have to prepare for a truly an extreme event.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other thought you have for us, something that you want to get across that's on your mind, or any final thoughts for us?
Well, I think now people need to acknowledge that this is no time to be quiet. We need to discuss these issues thoroughly. So what do we really have? What do we really want that happens in the world? What kind of a world we will see after the crisis is past, because it will pass naturally. So you discuss and take all different opinions in the mind, and do not think that cannot happen, that cannot happen. Just try to realistically think what could happen and inform your politicians, and that's how we should go forward with as a nation, and as a global human race of telling our leaders where we want this world to go. The power is in humans at the end, or the people, that is not our leaders. So we just have to acknowledge that we the people have the power to determine what happens in our future.
All right, your main website is gnseconomics.com, and people can find you on Twitter. Are there any other sites or projects we should know about?
Well, not now. Those are the main ones. So go there, check those.
Yes, and I definitely, do urge people to not only visit gnseconomics.com, subscribe to them, purchase the forecasts and reports, as well as bookmark Tuomas's excellent Twitter feed. It's a really good resource, and I'm happy to have seen it grow exponentially. Tuomas, your forecasts and insights stand out from the crowd, I believe. And so thank you again for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you. It was nice to be here again.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast and interview. I would like to remind you that our website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list that goes out each weekend with the latest podcast and a long collection of important news headlines. It's good to sign up for the newsletter in case we experience censorship and deplatforming. You can help the Geopolitics and Empire podcast by subscribing to and interacting with all of our channels such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Gab, Minds, and Steemit. You can also help us by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms such as iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, Spreaker, and so on. Finally, if you value our work and our mission and would like to see us continue interviewing experts from across the political spectrum, please consider leaving a one-time donation via PayPal or Bitcoin, or becoming a regular monthly supporter on our Patreon. All the links can be found on geopoliticsandempire.com. Thanks for listening.